The baby's cry shattered the frozen silence of the cabin. Just as Adelaide Morrison realized the wood pile outside had dwindled to nothing and her husband was 3 days overdue from what should have been an overnight trip to town. She pressed little Thomas closer to her chest, feeling his tiny body shiver despite the layers of blankets she had wrapped around them both, and wondered if this was how her story would end. Alone in the New Mexico Territory winter of 1881 with a child barely 2 weeks old and a storm howling outside that showed no signs of mercy. Her husband Daniel had left when Thomas was only 5 days old, promising to return with supplies before the weather turned. Adelaide had begged him to wait, to let her heal more, to give the baby time to grow stronger, but Daniel had been insistent. They needed flour, salt, coffee, and lamp oil. The shelves were bare, and he would not hear of his wife and newborn son going without. Now she sat in the growing cold, rationing the last of the dried meat, melting snow for water, and trying not to think about what might have happened to keep Daniel away. The cabin sat 3 miles outside Glenrio, far enough from town that neighbors were scarce and help was not something that arrived easily. Adelaide had grown up in St. Louis, the daughter of a banker, and had met Daniel at a church social when he was visiting relatives. He had painted such romantic pictures of life in the West, of open skies and opportunity, of building something with your own 2 hands. She had been 19 and swept away by his dreams, married him within 6 months, and followed him to New Mexico Territory. That had been 2 years ago, and while she had learned to cook over a wood stove, to preserve food, to sew and mend and make do, nothing had prepared her for this kind of isolation with a newborn and no husband to share the burden. Thomas whimpered against her shoulder, rooting for milk, and Adelaide adjusted her shawl to nurse him. At least her body was still providing that, even as the rest of her felt like it was failing. Her limbs ached with exhaustion, her head felt light from too little food, and the cold seemed to seep into her bones no matter how close she huddled to the dying fire. She had burned the last log an hour ago and had been feeding the flames with broken furniture, but even that was running out. She must have dozed because the next thing she knew, Thomas was crying again and the fire had burned down to embers. The cabin was nearly dark, the weak winter sunlight filtering through the frost-covered window doing little to illuminate the space. Adelaide struggled to her feet, her body protesting the movement, and stumbled toward the pile of broken chair pieces she had been using for kindling. Her hands shook as she added wood to the fire, coaxing it back to life with whispered prayers. That was when she heard it. The sound of a horse outside, the crunch of hooves on snow. Hope surged through her chest so violently it hurt. Daniel had come back. He had finally come back. She rushed to the window, wiping away the frost with her palm, and peered out into the white landscape. But the man dismounting from the horse was not her husband. He was taller, broader in the shoulders, wearing a heavy coat and a hat pulled low against the wind. Adelaide's hope curdled into fear. She was alone, vulnerable, with a newborn baby and no way to defend herself. The man was walking toward the cabin, leading his horse, and in his other hand he carried what looked like a bundle of supplies. Adelaide backed away from the window, clutching Thomas tighter. The knock on the door made her jump. "Madam, madam, I saw your smoke. Are you all right in there?" The voice was deep, concerned, and muffled by the wind. "My name is Owen Walsh. I am a rancher from about 10 miles north. I have been checking the homestead since the storm hit." Adelaide hesitated, her heart pounding, but what choice did she have? If she did not answer, if she turned away help, she and Thomas might not survive another night. Slowly, she moved to the door and cracked it open, keeping the chain latched. The man on her doorstep was indeed a stranger, but his face was weathered and honest, his eyes a clear blue-gray that held no malice. Snowflakes clung to his dark beard, and his breath formed clouds in the frigid air. He held up the bundle in his hands. "I have firewood on my horse, madam, and some food. You look like you could use both." "My husband will be back soon," Adelaide said, her voice shakier than she wanted it to be. "He just went to town." Something flickered across Owen Walsh's face, something that looked like sympathy mixed with knowledge he did not want to share. "Madam, might I come in just long enough to get your fire going proper? That baby sounds young, and this cold is nothing to take chances with." The word baby seemed to decide it for her. She unlatched the chain and stepped back, letting him enter. Owen moved quickly, stomping the snow from his boots just inside the door before crossing to the fireplace. He assessed the dying embers with a practiced eye, then turned back to the door. "I will get the wood. You just hold that little one and try to warm up." He made 3 trips, bringing in enough split logs to fill the space beside the fireplace, then returned with a canvas bag that clinked with the sound of canned goods. Adelaide watched him work, building up the fire with efficient movements until the flames roared back to life and heat, began to spread through the cabin. Thomas had quieted in her arms, lulled by the warmth and the presence of another human being. Owen straightened, brushing soot from his hands, and finally turned to face her properly. "When did your husband leave for town, madam?" "4 days ago," Adelaide admitted. "He was supposed to be back in 1 night, 2 at most." Owen's jaw tightened. He pulled off his hat, revealing dark hair touched with gray at the temples, though he could not have been more than 30 years old. "Madam, I do not want to frighten you, but that storm that has been blowing through, it hit hard and fast. The trail between here and Glenrio, it has snowdrifts higher than a man's head in places, if your husband got caught in it." "He might be sheltering in town," Adelaide interrupted, her voice desperate, waiting for it to clear before he comes back. "He might be," Owen agreed, but his tone suggested he did not believe it. "When did you have this baby?" 2 weeks ago. "His name is Thomas." Owen's expression softened. "That is a fine name. You should not be alone out here, not this soon after giving birth. Do you have any other family nearby?" "Anyone who can come stay with you," Adelaide shook her head. "Daniel's cousin lives in Glenrio, but we are not close. My family is all back in Missouri." "What about food, supplies?" "We were low. That is why Daniel went to town." Owen looked around the cabin, taking in the bare shelves, the broken furniture, the signs of desperation. When he spoke again, his voice was gentle but firm. "Madam, I cannot in good conscience leave you and your baby out here alone, not in this condition. I am going to ride into Glenrio tomorrow when the weather clears a bit, and I am going to ask after your husband. In the meantime, I can sleep in my bedroll by your fire tonight and make sure you have enough wood to last. Is that acceptable to you?" Every rule of propriety Adelaide had been raised with screamed that it was not acceptable, that a married woman could not have a strange man sleeping in her home. But those rules had been written for St. Louis ballrooms, not for New Mexico Territory cabins where survival mattered more than scandal. "That would be very kind of you, Mr. Walsh," she whispered. "Owen," he said. "Please call me Owen. And you are Adelaide Morrison." "Well, Mrs. Morrison, the first thing we need to do is get some food into you. You look like you have been running on nothing but worry and mother's will. When did you last have a proper meal?" Adelaide tried to remember and could not. Owen was already unpacking the canvas bag, pulling out cans of beans, a wrapped parcel that turned out to be dried beef, a small sack of cornmeal, and even a precious twist of sugar. He moved to the stove, assessing it with the same efficient attention he had given the fireplace, and soon had water heating and beans warming in a pot. "You just sit, madam. Let me do this." It felt strange to sit and watch a man work in her kitchen, but Adelaide was too exhausted to protest. She settled in the rocking chair that had somehow escaped being burned, adjusted Thomas in her arms, and let herself simply exist for a moment. The cabin was warming, the smell of food filled the air, and another living soul was present. The terrible isolation that had been crushing her for 4 days lifted just slightly. Owen worked quietly, occasionally glancing over to check on her and the baby. When the food was ready, he brought her a bowl and insisted she eat every bite before he touched his own portion. Adelaide tried to eat slowly, to maintain some dignity, but the food was warm and filling and her body craved it desperately. She finished the bowl faster than she meant to and looked up to find Owen watching her with an expression that was part concern, part admiration. "That baby is lucky to have a mother with your strength," he said quietly. "I do not feel strong," Adelaide admitted. "I feel terrified. Terrified is not the same as weak. You have kept yourself and your son alive in circumstances that would break most people. That is strength, even if it does not feel like it." Something in his words, in the quiet certainty of them, made Adelaide's eyes sting with tears. She blinked them back, but not before Owen saw. He looked away politely, giving her privacy for her emotion. "I will go tend to my horse and bring in a bit more wood before full dark," he said, rising to his feet. "You rest while you can." After he went outside, Adelaide allowed herself a few silent tears, releasing some of the fear and tension she had been holding. Thomas stirred in her arms, his tiny face scrunching up, and she rocked him gently until he settled back into sleep. Through the window, she could see Owen moving around outside, unsaddling his horse and leading it to the small lean-to barn where Daniel kept their mule. He moved with the easy confidence of a man who had spent his life working with animals and weather and the harsh demands of the frontier. Adelaide found herself wondering about him. He had said he was a rancher, which meant he likely had his own land and cattle. Why was he out checking on homesteads in a storm? Was there a Mrs. Walsh waiting for him somewhere? The thought made her feel guilty, but she pushed the guilt aside. She was a married woman worried about her husband, nothing more. Owen Walsh was simply a good man doing a neighborly deed. When Owen came back inside, his arms full of wood, the last of the daylight was fading. He stacked the logs carefully, then pulled supplies from his saddlebags to make up a bedroll near the fire. "I will be right here if you or the baby need anything in the night," he said. "You should sleep in your bed, get proper rest." "I have not left Thomas alone since he was born," Adelaide said. "I have been sleeping in the chair with him." Owen frowned. "That is no good for your recovery. What if we fashion a kind of cradle box you can put right next to your bed?" "I saw some crates outside. I could line one with blankets, make it soft and warm. Then you could sleep proper and still have him close enough to hear every breath." The idea was so sensible and so kind that Adelaide felt tears threaten again. "I would appreciate that very much." Owen went back outside into the dark and returned with a wooden crate that had once held apples. He cleaned it out, then used Adelaide's spare blankets to create a soft nest inside. He placed it right beside her bed, close enough that she could reach over and touch Thomas without getting up. "There," he said with satisfaction. "That should do until your husband returns and can build something proper." The mention of Daniel hung in the air between them. Adelaide wanted to cling to hope, to believe that any moment her husband would walk through that door with an apology and an explanation. But as the hours had passed and Owen had appeared instead, a cold certainty had been growing in her chest. Something had happened, something bad. Daniel would never have stayed away this long by choice, not with a brand new son waiting at home. "What do you think happened to him?" she asked quietly. "Truly?" Owen was silent for a long moment, his face grave in the firelight. "The storm was fierce, madam. The worst I have seen in 5 years of living out here. If a man got caught in it on the trail, if his horse spooked or he got disoriented in the white, it would be easy to lose the path. Easy to freeze before finding shelter. You think he is dead? I think it is a possibility you need to prepare for, but I will not know for certain until I ride into Glenrio tomorrow and ask questions. There is a chance he made it to town and is stuck there waiting for conditions to improve. There is a chance he took shelter somewhere between here and there. I promise you, Mrs. Morrison, I will find out what happened." Adelaide nodded, her throat too tight to speak. Owen seemed to understand that she needed time to absorb this, to face the possibility of widowhood alone. He busied himself checking the fire one last time, then settled into his bedroll with his back courteously turned to give her privacy. "Good night, madam. You call out if you need anything." "Good night, Owen, and thank you for everything." Adelaide retreated to her bed, laying Thomas gently in his makeshift cradle. He looked so small, so impossibly fragile in the nest of blankets. She lay down on the mattress for the first time in days, her body sinking into the relative comfort, and listened to the sound of Thomas breathing and the fire crackling and Owen's steady presence just a few feet away. For the first time since Daniel left, she felt something that was almost like safety. She woke several times in the night to nurse Thomas, and each time she saw Owen still awake, keeping watch over the fire in the cabin. He never complained, never asked for thanks, just nodded at her in the dim light to let her know all was well. By morning, Adelaide felt more rested than she had in weeks, even with the interrupted sleep. Owen was up with the dawn, already dressed and stoking the fire back to life. He made coffee from his own supplies and cooked cornmeal mush for breakfast, serving Adelaide before himself again. The storm had finally blown itself out, leaving behind a world transformed by snow and ice. "I am going to ride to Glenrio now," Owen said as he prepared to leave. "I should be back by nightfall. Is there anything specific you need me to bring besides news of your husband?" "Lamp oil," Adelaide said. "And coffee if you can manage it. I will pay you back as soon as I can access our funds. Do not worry about payment now. We will sort all that later." He paused at the door, his hand on the latch. "Mrs. Morrison, Adelaide, if I find news that is hard to hear, I want you to know that you and your son will not be left alone to face it. There are good people in these parts. We look after our own." Adelaide nodded, not trusting herself to speak. She watched him ride away, his horse's hooves kicking up plumes of snow until he disappeared into the white landscape. Then she turned back to the cabin, to Thomas, who was starting to fuss for his morning feeding, and tried to prepare herself for whatever truth Owen would bring back with him. The day passed slowly. Adelaide cleaned the cabin, organized the supplies Owen had brought, and spent long stretches simply holding Thomas and looking out at the snow. She found herself thinking about Owen Walsh, about his quiet competence and his kindness. There had been no judgment in his eyes when he saw how desperate her situation was, no condescension in his manner when he took over tasks she could not manage. He had treated her like a person deserving of help and respect, and in her exhausted, frightened state, that simple dignity had meant more than she could express. It was nearly dark when she heard the horse returning. Adelaide's heart hammered as she moved to the window, and the expression on Owen's face as he dismounted told her everything she needed to know before he even reached the door. She opened it before he could knock. "He is dead." "Yes, madam. I am so sorry." They found his body 2 days ago, about a mile from town. His horse had thrown him during the storm, broke his leg from what the doctor could tell. He tried to walk the rest of the way, but the cold got him. "They have been waiting for the weather to clear to come tell you." Adelaide stood very still, feeling the news settle over her like a heavy blanket. Part of her had known, had been preparing for this, but hearing it confirmed still felt like a physical blow. Daniel was gone. Her husband, the father of her child, the man she had followed west with such hope, was dead and frozen in the New Mexico Territory winter. "They buried him?" she asked. "Yes, madam. In the churchyard in Glenrio. The pastor said he will hold a proper service whenever you are able to attend." "I see. Thank you for finding out, for telling me." Owen shifted his weight, clearly uncomfortable with her calm reaction. But Adelaide had cried herself dry over the past 4 days. She had no tears left, only a strange numb feeling and the pressing weight of practical concerns. She was a widow at 21 years old with a newborn baby and a homestead she did not know how to run alone. "I brought the supplies you asked for," Owen said quietly. "And I spoke with your husband's cousin, man named Peter Morrison. He said he will come check on you in a few days, but he has 6 kids of his own and his wife is poorly, so he cannot offer you a place to stay." "I was not expecting him to." "Adelaide." Owen stepped closer, his eyes serious. "You cannot stay out here alone. Not with a baby this young, not in winter. You have no wood split, no stores put by, and you are still recovering from childbirth. I have a proposal, and I want you to hear me out before you say no." Adelaide looked at him, this man who had appeared like an answer to prayer, and who was now the only person standing between her and complete desperation. "I am listening. My ranch is 10 miles north of here, closer to the plateau where the grazing is better. It is a substantial place, 3 bedrooms, built solid and stocked for winter. My sister Josephine lives with me since her husband passed 2 years back, so you would have another woman present for propriety. You and Thomas could come stay with us until spring, until you are stronger and can decide what you want to do next. There would be no expectations, no obligations beyond helping Josephine with some of the household tasks if you are able. You would be a guest, a neighbor in need." It was an impossibly generous offer, and Adelaide's first instinct was to refuse. She could not impose on strangers, could not abandon her home, could not accept such charity. But then Thomas made a small sound from his cradle, and reality crashed down on her. Pride was a luxury she could not afford. Her son needed warmth and food and safety, and she was in no position to provide those things on her own. Your sister would not mind, a stranger and a baby arriving on her doorstep. Josephine has been lonely since her husband died. She would welcome the company, and she loves babies. She had a daughter who passed from fever last year. Having a little one in the house again might do her good. Adelaide closed her eyes, thinking it through. Every option before her was difficult, but some were more survivable than others. Going to Owen's ranch would give her time to heal and think and plan. Staying here alone would likely end with her and Thomas dead before spring. "I accept," she said finally, "and I thank you more than I can say." Relief washed over Owen's face. "Good, that is good. We will leave first thing in the morning. Pack what you and Thomas need, anything you want to bring. I will spend tonight helping you sort through things and boarding up the cabin proper so it will be here when you are ready to come back to it." They worked together through the evening, Adelaide showing Owen where Daniel kept tools and supplies while she packed clothes and personal items into a trunk. It felt surreal, dismantling her married life less than an hour after learning she was a widow. But Owen's steady presence kept her grounded, his practical suggestions and quiet support making the unbearable almost bearable. That night, Owen slept by the fire again while Adelaide lay in bed and finally allowed herself to grieve. She cried silently into her pillow, mourning Daniel and the life they had planned together, mourning the father Thomas would never know. At some point she must have made a sound because Owen's voice came softly through the darkness. "It is all right to cry, Adelaide. Let it out. I am here." And somehow that made it possible. Knowing she was not completely alone, that someone cared whether she lived or died, gave her permission to feel the full weight of her loss. She cried until there was nothing left, until exhaustion pulled her back under into dreamless sleep. Morning came cold and clear. Owen loaded Adelaide's trunk onto his horse, then helped her bundle Thomas against the frigid air. He had fashioned a kind of sling that would allow her to carry the baby against her chest while riding, keeping both hands free for the reins. But when Adelaide approached the horse Owen had saddled for her, he shook his head. "You will ride with me. It is safer, and you can keep Thomas warmer between us." Adelaide hesitated, but the logic was sound. She allowed Owen to lift her onto his horse, settling in front of him in the saddle with Thomas secured between them. Owen's arms came around both of them to hold the reins, and Adelaide felt the solid warmth of his chest against her back. It was intimate and improper and absolutely necessary, and she forced herself not to think about anything except the 10 miles they needed to travel. The ride took 3 hours through the snow-covered landscape. Owen kept the pace easy, pointing out landmarks and talking about the country they were passing through, clearly trying to distract Adelaide from her grief and the strangeness of the situation. Adelaide found herself responding, asking questions about ranching and the territory, and discovered that Owen was an educated man who had come west after the war. He had been a soldier, had seen terrible things, and had wanted nothing more than open space and honest work afterward. "Bought the land 5 years ago with my army savings," he explained. "Started with 50 head of cattle and a lot of hope. Now I am running 300 head and doing well enough. It is a good life, hard but good. And when Josephine needed a place after her husband died, I was glad to be able to offer her one. You are a kind man, Owen Walsh. Just trying to be decent. World has enough cruelty without good people adding to it." Adelaide found herself wishing she had met Owen before she met Daniel, then immediately felt guilty for the thought. But she could not deny that there was something about this man, something solid and good and trustworthy that called to her in ways she had never felt with her husband. Daniel had been charming and full of dreams, but Owen was steady and full of action. He did not just talk about helping people. He did it. The ranch house appeared as they crested a rise, and Adelaide caught her breath. It was indeed substantial. A well-built structure with a stone chimney and glass windows and a barn nearby that looked sturdy and weatherproof. Smoke rose from the chimney, and as they approached, the door opened to reveal a woman in her late 20s with red hair and a curious expression. "Josephine," Owen called. "This is Adelaide Morrison and her son Thomas. They will be staying with us for a while." Josephine's face lit up with immediate warmth. She hurried down to help, exclaiming over the baby and ushering Adelaide inside with motherly efficiency. Within minutes, Adelaide found herself seated near a roaring fire with a cup of hot tea in her hands while Josephine cooed over Thomas. "Oh, he is perfect," Josephine breathed. "What a beautiful boy. How old?" 2 weeks. Josephine's eyes widened and she looked at Owen with sudden understanding. Her husband, caught in the storm, died on the way to Glenrio. "Oh, you poor dear." Josephine turned to Adelaide with eyes full of genuine sympathy. "You are safe here now. We will take good care of you and this precious baby." And over the following weeks, they did exactly that. Josephine was delighted to have another woman in the house, someone to talk to and cook with and share the endless small tasks of keeping a home. She took to Thomas as if he were her own, often taking him from Adelaide to walk and rock and sing to, giving the new mother precious hours to sleep and recover. Adelaide's body slowly healed from childbirth, her strength returning day by day. Owen was a constant, steady presence. He rose before dawn to tend the cattle, came in for meals, and spent evenings repairing tack or reading by the fire. He was respectful of Adelaide's grief and space, never pushing, but always available if she needed to talk. Adelaide found herself watching him, noticing the way he moved, the sound of his laugh when Josephine teased him, the gentleness in his hands when he held Thomas. It was wrong to feel this way, she told herself. Daniel had been dead less than a month. She should be in deepest mourning, not noticing the way Owen's eyes crinkled when he smiled, or the sound of his voice saying her name. But grief and attraction were not mutually exclusive, and Adelaide was learning that the heart was far more complicated than she had ever imagined. Spring came late to New Mexico territory that year. It was March before the snow began to truly melt and April before the land turned green. By then, Adelaide had been at the ranch for 3 months, and Thomas was growing fat and happy under 3 adults' devoted attention. The baby had started smiling, reaching for things, making delighted sounds that filled the house with joy. Adelaide knew she needed to make plans, to figure out what came next. Her cabin still stood waiting, but the thought of returning to it alone felt impossible. Peter Morrison had written to say that he would buy the land from her if she wanted to sell, which would give her enough money to return to St. Louis or perhaps start over somewhere else. But the idea of leaving felt wrong in a way she could not quite articulate. One evening in late April, after Josephine had taken Thomas to bed and Owen was banking the fire, Adelaide finally spoke what had been on her mind for weeks. "I do not want to go back to St. Louis." Owen turned to face her, his expression carefully neutral. "What do you want, Adelaide?" "I want to stay in New Mexico territory. I want Thomas to grow up here in the West, but I cannot do it alone. I am not strong enough or skilled enough, and it would not be fair to him." "You are stronger and more skilled than you think. You have learned an enormous amount these past months." "Because I have had help, because I have had you and Josephine." Adelaide took a deep breath, gathering courage. "Owen, I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly even if the truth is difficult." "All right." "These past months, the way you have looked at me sometimes, the way you are with Thomas, the way you always make sure I am warm enough, fed enough, rested enough. Is that just kindness? Just you being a decent neighbor? Or is there more to it?" Owen was quiet for so long that Adelaide's heart began to sink. She had misread the situation, had projected her own growing feelings onto him, had made a fool of herself. But then he crossed the room and knelt beside her chair, taking her hand in both of his. "Adelaide, from the moment I walked into your cabin and saw you standing there with your baby, fierce and frightened and so damn brave, I felt something shift in my chest. These months of having you here, of watching you heal and grow stronger, of seeing you with Thomas, of hearing your laugh and your thoughts and your hopes, I have come to care for you in ways that go far beyond neighborly kindness. But you are a widow who has lost her husband. You deserve time to grieve, time to heal, time to know your own mind without pressure from me or anyone else." Adelaide felt tears spill over, but they were not tears of grief this time. "Daniel was a good man, and I am sorry he died. But if I am honest with myself, Owen, our marriage was built more on my girlish dreams than on real partnership. We did not know each other well when we married. We did not have what you and I have found these past months." "And what is that?" Owen's voice was rough with emotion. "Trust, respect, partnership, the knowledge that we can rely on each other when things are hard. You have shown me what it means to truly care for someone, to put their needs alongside your own and work together towards something better. That is worth more than all the romantic dreams in the world." Owen reached up with one hand to cup her face, his thumb brushing away her tears. "Adelaide Morrison, are you saying what I think you are saying?" "I am saying that I have fallen in love with you, Owen Walsh. I am saying that if you feel the same way, if you can accept me and my son, I would like to build a life with you. Not because I need rescuing, not because I am desperate, but because I genuinely want to wake up beside you every morning and work beside you every day and raise Thomas with you as his father." "Are you sure? Are you absolutely certain?" "Because once I kiss you, Adelaide, once I commit to this, I am committed for life. I do not do anything halfway. I have never been more certain of anything." Owen stood, pulling Adelaide to her feet with him, and finally kissed her. It was tender and passionate and felt like coming home in ways that Adelaide had never experienced before. When they broke apart, both of them were smiling, and Owen rested his forehead against hers. "We will do this properly. I will court you for a few months, give people time to adjust to the idea. Then I will marry you in the church in Glenrio with all our neighbors as witnesses, and I will adopt Thomas as my legal son. We will build a good life here, Adelaide. I promise you that. I know you will. We will build it together." Josephine appeared in the doorway, her eyes dancing with amusement. "About time you two figured that out. I have been watching you dance around each other for weeks." Owen laughed, pulling Adelaide close to his side. "Did you know my sister is incurably nosy?" "I am observant. There is a difference." Josephine came over and hugged them both. "I am truly happy for you. You are perfect for each other, and Thomas deserves a father like you, Owen." They did it exactly as Owen said they would. He courted Adelaide through the spring and summer, taking her on rides across the ranch land, sitting with her on the porch in the evenings talking about everything and nothing, always respectful, always patient. Thomas grew and thrived, learning to roll over and then to sit up, his bright eyes taking in the world around him. The neighbors in Glenrio had opinions, of course. Some thought Adelaide was remarrying too quickly, that she should observe a full year of mourning, but most of the women understood. Widows with small children could not afford the luxury of extended grief, not in the territory where survival required partnership. And anyone who saw Owen and Adelaide together could see that theirs was a genuine love match, not a marriage of convenience. They wed in September of 1882, with Josephine standing up for Adelaide and Owen's ranch foreman standing up for him. Thomas, nearly 9 months old and trying valiantly to crawl, made enthusiastic noises throughout the ceremony that made everyone laugh. Adelaide wore a simple blue dress. Owen wore his best suit, and when the pastor pronounced them husband and wife, the kiss they shared was both chaste and full of promise. The wedding supper was held at the ranch, with half of Glenrio in attendance. There was music and dancing and more food than Adelaide had seen in one place since leaving St. Louis. People toasted the bride and groom, blessed their union, and predicted that they would have a house full of children before long. That night, after all the guests had gone and Josephine had taken Thomas to sleep in her room to give the newlyweds privacy, Owen carried Adelaide over the threshold of their bedroom. He set her down gently, his hands settling on her waist, his eyes searching her face. "Are you happy?" he asked. "Happier than I knew was possible. You saved my life, Owen. You and Josephine both. No, Adelaide, you saved your own life by being strong enough to survive until help could reach you. I just had the great fortune of being the one who got to help. And now I have the even greater fortune of being your husband. Make love to me, Owen. Please." He did, with tenderness and passion, and Adelaide discovered that intimacy with someone you truly loved was utterly different from what she had known before. This was not just physical, it was a joining of souls, a celebration of the partnership they had built and the future they would share. In the morning, Adelaide woke wrapped in Owen's arms, the New Mexico sun streaming through the window, and felt peace settle deep in her bones. This was home. This man, this place, this life they were building together. Thomas called out from Josephine's room, his babbling demand for breakfast unmistakable, and Owen chuckled against Adelaide's neck. "Our son is awake. Our son. Not her son or Daniel's son, but ours." Adelaide felt her eyes sting with grateful tears. "We should get him. In a minute. Let me just hold you a moment longer." They lay there in the growing light, and Adelaide thought about the journey that had brought her to this place. The desperate winter night when Owen had knocked on her door. The ride through the snow to his ranch. The slow building of trust and friendship and love. The fear and grief that had been transformed into hope and joy. Life was not easy on the frontier. There would be hard winters and dry summers, sick cattle and money worries, the 1,000 daily struggles of building something from nothing. But Adelaide knew with bone-deep certainty that she and Owen would face all of it together, that they were stronger as a partnership than either could be alone. The years that followed proved her right. Thomas grew into a sturdy, happy boy who called Owen Papa from the moment he could speak, and never knew any father but the man who had chosen to raise him. When Thomas was 2, Adelaide gave birth to twin daughters, Emily and Grace, who inherited their father's blue-gray eyes and their mother's determination. Owen was delighted with his daughters, doting on them shamelessly and threatening violence to any boy who might court them someday. Josephine eventually remarried, a widower from Glenrio with 2 sons who needed a mother's touch. She moved to town but visited often, and Adelaide was glad that her sister-in-law had found happiness again. The ranch continued to prosper, growing to 500 head of cattle and requiring Owen to hire more hands. Adelaide proved to have a gift for the business side of ranching, keeping the books and managing contracts with buyers, becoming a full partner in every sense of the word. When Thomas was 5, Adelaide took him to the churchyard in Glenrio to visit Daniel's grave. She wanted him to know that he had been born to one father and chosen by another, that both men had value in his story. Owen came with them, standing back respectfully while Adelaide explained to Thomas about the man who had given him life but died trying to provide for his family. "Papa Owen is my real papa though, right?" Thomas asked, his small hand gripping Adelaide's tightly. "Papa Owen is absolutely your real papa," Adelaide confirmed. "He has raised you and loved you since you were tiny. But Daniel Morrison was a good man who wanted very much to meet you, and it is okay to remember him too." Thomas thought about this, then turned to Owen. "Is it okay if I remember both?" Owen knelt down, pulling his son into a tight hug. "It is more than okay. You honor them both by being the fine boy you are." They walked back to the wagon hand in hand. A family bound not just by blood, but by choice and love, and the determination to build something good together. Adelaide looked at her husband and her son, thought of the infant daughters waiting at home with their housekeeper, and felt gratitude wash over her. She had been so close to losing everything that terrible winter. But instead, she had found everything she never knew she needed. Found a love that was steady and true. Found a partner who valued her strength as much as he supported her weakness. Found a home not in a place but in a person. That night, after the children were asleep, Adelaide and Owen sat on their porch and watched the sun set over the New Mexico landscape. The sky was painted in shades of orange and purple and gold, and the air was warm with the promise of summer. "Do you ever regret it?" Adelaide asked. "Taking in a desperate widow and her baby that winter?" Owen turned to her, his eyes soft with love. "I regret that you had to suffer through that terror alone, but I will never regret finding you, loving you, building this life with you. You and Thomas were the best things that ever happened to me, Adelaide Walsh. We were pretty fortunate ourselves finding you. I think maybe we found each other. At exactly the right moment, in exactly the right way. Adelaide leaned into her husband's solid warmth, listened to the evening sounds of the ranch settling down for the night, and knew he was right. Life had brought her through darkness to this place of light, through loneliness to this perfect belonging. She had been left alone with a newborn in winter, and a cowboy had brought supplies and never left again. That simple act of kindness had transformed into something neither of them could have predicted, something beautiful and lasting and true. Inside the house, one of the twins began to fuss and Adelaide started to rise, but Owen stopped her with a gentle hand. "I will get her. You rest." She watched him disappear inside. This good man who had saved her and loved her and given her a life beyond her wildest dreams. Then she looked out at the land they had built together, the ranch that would someday belong to Thomas and the girls, a legacy of love and hard work and the courage to say yes when life offered an unexpected second chance. The stars were coming out now, bright pinpoints in the darkening sky. Adelaide thought of that first night Owen had kept watch by her fire, how she had never imagined that the stranger on her doorstep would become her entire world. But that was the thing about life in the West, about life anywhere really. You could not predict where the trail would lead. You could only put one foot in front of the other, accept help when it was offered, and be brave enough to love when love found you. Owen returned with Emily settled in his arms, rocking her gently. He sat down beside Adelaide again, and together they sat in comfortable silence, watching their land and holding their child and simply being together. This was happiness, Adelaide thought. Not some grand dramatic thing, but this quiet contentment, this absolute certainty that you were exactly where you were meant to be. "I love you," she said softly. "I love you too," Owen replied. "Always have, always will." And that was the truth of it. The simple, beautiful truth that had grown from that desperate winter night into a lifetime of partnership and joy. Adelaide closed her eyes and breathed in the warm evening air, listened to her husband's steady heartbeat and her daughter's soft breathing, and thanked God for storms and cowboys and the unexpected paths that led to home. Years later, when Thomas was grown and bringing home the woman he wanted to marry, when the twins were teenagers causing beautiful chaos wherever they went, when 2 more sons had joined the family, and the ranch had expanded to become one of the most successful in the territory, Adelaide would tell the story of how she and Owen came together. Her children never tired of hearing it, the romance and drama of their mother being saved from certain death by their father's timely arrival. But Adelaide always made sure they understood the real lesson of the story. It was not that Owen had saved her, though he had. It was not that she had been helpless, though she had needed help. The real lesson was about recognizing love when it appeared, about having the courage to accept it even when the timing seemed wrong, about building a partnership that could weather any storm because it was based on mutual respect and genuine affection. "Your father brought supplies that first night," she would tell them, "but what he really brought was hope, and I brought my own strength, my own determination to survive. Together, we built something neither of us could have created alone. That is what marriage should be. That is what love really means." Owen would always add his own coda to the story, pulling Adelaide close and kissing her temple while their children groaned good-naturedly at the display of affection. "Best decision I ever made was knocking on that cabin door. Second best was refusing to leave." "You said you were just spending one night," Adelaide would tease. "I lied. I took one look at you and knew I was staying forever." "Forever is a long time, Mr. Walsh. Not nearly long enough, Mrs. Walsh. not nearly long enough, and it was not. The years flew by with the speed that time always has when life is full and happy and purposeful. There were hard moments, of course. Seasons when the cattle got sick, years when drought threatened everything they had built, the usual struggles of raising children and running a ranch and simply living. But through all of it, Adelaide and Owen stood together, facing each challenge as a team, drawing strength from their partnership. When Owen's hair turned fully gray and Adelaide's face gained the lines that came from decades of laughter and tears, when Thomas took over most of the ranch operations, and the grandchildren started arriving in a parade of tiny perfect faces, they would still sit on their porch in the evenings and watch the sunset together. Still reach for each other's hands without thinking. Still find joy and comfort in each other's presence. The cabin where Adelaide had nearly died that terrible winter was long gone, reclaimed by the land. But the story of what happened there lived on, passed down through generations as a reminder that love could grow from the most unlikely circumstances, that kindness mattered, that saying yes to helping a stranger could change not just their life but your own. Adelaide Walsh lived to see her youngest grandchild born, a little girl who was named after her and who had Owen's blue-gray eyes. She held that baby in her arms on a warm September afternoon, surrounded by 3 generations of the family she and Owen had built, and felt complete. This was what she had survived for, what that terrified young widow had fought through the winter for, what every difficult decision and hard day had led to. Owen sat beside her, his arm around her shoulders, and together they looked at their legacy. Not just in the prosperous ranch or the healthy cattle or the sturdy house that had sheltered so much love. Their legacy was in the people, in the children and grandchildren who carried their values forward, who understood that family was built through choice and effort and unwavering commitment. "We did good, Adelaide," Owen said quietly. "We did very good," she agreed. And when Adelaide Walsh finally passed peacefully in her sleep at the age of 73, with Owen holding her hand and their children gathered around, she left behind a life that had been full and meaningful and rich with love. The story of the widow and the cowboy became legend in Glenrio, told and retold as an example of the best of what the West had been, what humanity could be when faced with someone in desperate need. Owen lived 2 more years after Adelaide died, long enough to make sure all their children were settled and secure, long enough to tell each grandchild how much their grandmother had loved them. When his time came, he was buried beside Adelaide in the churchyard, and the marker read Owen Walsh, beloved husband and father, who never left. Because that was the truth of him, the essence of the man who had knocked on a cabin door one winter night and found his entire future waiting inside. And sometimes, on cold winter evenings when the wind blew across the New Mexico territory, ranchers checking their homesteads for folks in trouble would think of Owen Walsh and Adelaide Morrison and be inspired to go that extra mile, to knock on that door, to offer help even when it was inconvenient. Because that was the legacy they had left behind, not just to their own family but to everyone who heard their story. The legacy of showing up, of staying, of loving fierce and true no matter what the world threw at you. That was how a desperate winter night became the beginning of a great love story. That was how a widow with a newborn found not just survival but joy. That was how a cowboy who brought supplies ended up staying forever. And that was how 2 people who should have been strangers became the truest partners, proving that sometimes the most beautiful things in life come wrapped in the hardest circumstances, if you are only brave enough to reach out and hold on tight.